Alright, so we need to find a 3D static mesh that we can use as sort of a placeholder for the body of our player's pawn, or the physical representation of the player in the game world. So literally, since this is just a placeholder, all I'm going to do, I've actually already done it, but all I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Google, and then I'm going to search for free meshes. You can actually see the work that I've done here. But all I did to do that is go to this first website. It looks like tf3dm.com, and it looks like there's a lot of free meshes here. You can select a category. I think I did vehicles, and then I just looked through the first couple of pages until I found this beauty. Downloaded it. It came through as a RAR file. So I extracted the RAR file and got this, which is this is actually just literally the file that came out of the RAR, and in this case it is a .obj file. Unreal Engine is perfectly happy with .obj files. In fact, they work very, very well. Whenever you are importing an asset that it was not created using or with Unreal Engine 4 in mind, it's important to note that the settings that the object was exported from the 3D modeling software with might not match up with Unreal Engine very well. So let's go back to our Blue Falcon here. And now the actual import process is extremely complicated, and so it's important that you watch this very closely. You're going to click the 3D object file that you'd like to import. You're going to hold that click down and drag it into the content browser in Unreal Engine. Then you let it go, and you're going to get an import dialog. That is literally all there is to it. It's very easy. Now, actually, I'll show you. This always takes a little bit of trial and error. If you're working with a .obj file or a 3D model that you're not familiar with by making personally or having edited yourself. So in this case, I'm just going to show you what my process is. In this case, I'm just going to click Import All. Okay, and it gives you some warnings. All right, no smooth and groovy information was found in this FBX scene. Right, so that's not terribly surprising. But it also gives you this other error message: the imported mesh is very small. This is most likely an issue with the units used when exporting to FBX, and so that gives you a great example of Unreal Engine trying to take care of me, right? So if I had made this model myself and I was importing it, it tells you, hey, you imported this tiny little ant of a model, and you're going to need to go back and change the export units to match what Unreal Engine expects, and that's a very straightforward thing. To get an idea of what we're looking at, you could always double click it, but I like to kind of have an idea of relative scale, so I'm actually going to drag one into my scene, just like that. And now I've placed myself one of these little falcons here, and as you can see, it is so small that the little white golf ball that shows me where my cursor is as large as it, which is not good. So to get a better idea in terms of what we're looking at, I'm going to up here click the Select and Scale Objects button. I'm going to click the box that is at the origin of the cursor, and I'm going to scale it up by moving the cursor in one direction. There we go. Say it's a little bit complicated when you're doing it in 3 dimensions at once, but now I'm translating it again. Scale, scale up. Perfect. Alright, well, the model looks great, but it's not aligned properly. Alright, so what we need to do is we need to figure out what it takes to, so firstly, let's take a look at the scale here. I have scaled this to 42 times its original size, and that is what I'm looking at right now, something 42 times the size of the original, and that looks like it's a pretty good place to start. We will probably lock the aspect ratios and try 45 times the scale. And that looks like that's going to work out really well. 45 is not terribly difficult to remember, so it's a good place to start. So, to get this oriented properly, I'm going to change the rotation and take a look at the axis that's rotating as I'm doing that. That would be roll. So it's important to remember I've got roll set to 90, or basically 90, 89.9 forever. So 90. And then I'm also going to want to reorient this, this 3D model to be facing away from where the camera is right now. If you take a look at this player start, this is a good idea of how you want to orient your objects. As you drag a mesh onto the screen, if it's not oriented along with this arrow that comes with the player start object here, player start, there's an arrow that comes off of it, then you're going to want to change that so that they match up. That's going to make it easier if you have a player, it's going to make it so that when you spawn an object that uses this as the static mesh, if you spawn it with this player start, it'll be facing the direction of the arrow instead of some other random direction, like, for example, to the right. So let's grab this, this arc here on the rotation tool and turn it 90 degrees, or I guess it's important to note, negative 90 degrees. And that's going to give us the final change that we have to make when we're importing this into our into the content browser for the second time. So the three things we need to remember to change are that we need to have the scale set to 45, the roll set to 90, and the yaw set to negative 90. And then we can re-import it, and it will re-import as if we had built it for Unreal Engine. So I'm going to go ahead and select all of the assets that I've just imported with the object, and I'm going to delete them. And it's going to give me a little warning here because I have a copy of it in the game world, and it's going to tell me, hey, this thing's in use. It's referenced in memory. Do you want to, and there are undo history items that are related to this object. What do you want us to do? I want you to force delete it. So now it's gone from the content browser, but you can still see, since I had dragged an instance of that static mesh into the world, that we still have an item here in the world outliner. Let's delete that. That's just good housekeeping. Alright, so let's re-import that one more time, and remember to change the things that we need to make it look like it was built for Unreal Engine. So, firstly, the translation was okay. It's right on the origin. It's exactly where we want it. Import rotation. If you remember, our roll was 90, our yaw was negative 90, and our scale, import uniform scale, was 45. I'm going to live on the wild side and actually change that. I'm going to change it to 50, because the more I looked at it, the less I was excited about how big it was. So let's import that. So we're going to import all, and now we don't get that little tiny model warning like we did last time, which means that something went right. And here in our preview of the static mesh, you can see it's kind of pointed to the right hand side and it's actually visible. That's a good thing. When we drag it in onto the scene, just like it was when we got done changing everything around, it is both a decent size and it is facing the correct direction. Now I'm wondering if we shouldn't have moved it up in the z-axis at all, because you can see that corner of that fin is intersecting with our floor. You know, given how I want to design the actual player pawn, I think that that's not going to be too much of a challenge. We'll leave it. Alright, so we're going to delete that static mesh out of the game world because we don't want just a static version of our vehicle just sitting there. This also brings me to an interesting point. So all of these assets got imported with our static mesh because the static mesh came with textures, materials, and Unreal Engine knows how to handle all of that by default. So let's take just a second, again, for the sake of good housekeeping, and create a little bit of an hierarchy. So we're going to create a new folder in the content folder called Meshes. And we're actually going to take all of this stuff and I'm going to put it inside that folder. Now there's, I'm sure, a lot to be said for organizing your folders in ways more extensible than this. And so please do not, you know, I do know how Unreal and how Epic Games suggests that you set up your folder hierarchy. This game is going to be simple enough that this upcoming folder hierarchy and organizational style will work just fine. So be aware that there are ways that you, if you had a project that was going to have thousands of textures in it and hundreds of materials in it, you would want to have meshes and all of your meshes there. and then another one for all your materials, and another one for all your textures, and then have subcategories for each one of those so it's easy to navigate to. But given that I'm not likely to have thousands of assets in total in this game project, I'm just going to do it the way that is most intuitive, which is for me to create a new folder inside my meshes folder called we'll just match the name of the mesh here, and then place all of the assets that this mesh depends on, including the mesh itself, into that folder. So now, if I need to figure out, oh, where did I leave that mesh? I need to change its import settings. I can do that here. You can change the import settings in, let's see, for a particular mesh, but I cannot remember how offhand. Anyways, it doesn't matter. So for now, that's where I'm going to do it, and that's how I'm going to name the folders. That's how I'm going to organize the folders for this project. So now that we have our mesh imported, let's take a look at our PC blueprint again. And we still don't have any kind of body to speak of here, so let's add that. Now we've added our static mesh component to the components list here, and we've made it our root. That was in the previous video. It's important to note here that when you add a component to a blueprint, if it's a component that holds data, it's just going to have the shell. It's not actually, it doesn't have anything in it. And so to actually change which mesh this mesh component holds, you're going to take a look over here in the details panel, and you can kind of see all the different types of data that the static mesh component carries, and you can see it carries quite a bit. You're going to want to take a look at the static mesh field, and right now you can see it's none. All right, so let's add one. Let's change that from none to, and this will give you all of the static meshes by default. Right now we just have the one, but if we had 10,000, regardless of the folder hierarchy in the project, you could always search for it. So I knew that this was named blue something or other, so I typed blue and it would pop up. Alright, so let's have that be our static mesh. That was very easy. So now take a look at what we've got going on here. So the static mesh is the only component that we have, and otherwise this is just a very blank field. So that's what this is going to look like when we add it to the world. Before we do anything else, this is a habit that you need to make sure that you're getting into. Anytime you make a change to a blueprint, this is going to happen. You're going to have this little question mark pop up on the compile button, and it says that it's dirty. All that that means is that right now you've made changes to the blueprint here that are not going to be reflected in the project file, and they're not going to be saved. So this is telling you you need to recompile this blueprint so that any changes that you make to it will update in real time here. The saving of the blueprint, once you make a change and compile it, it will go live here. But if you shut down the Unreal Engine and then open it back up again, changes that you make, that you compiled and didn't save, will not be reflected. You'll lose all those changes. So throughout this video series, you're going to see me do this quite a bit. Compile, save. Once you've done compile save, you can exit out of the blueprint editor, and now that blueprint is updated with the changes that we've made, and those changes have been saved. So now let's drag and drop one of our blueprints into the scene. So it looks just like it did when we had just the 3D mesh there, but this object, this blueprint object, in addition to the 3D mesh, has a bunch of information to it. So like this, for example, this pawn component to the blueprint, you can tell it how to behave with inputs, which is something that static meshes can't do. You require a pawn to be able to handle input. So now that we have a basic physical representation of the player, the next video is going to go over how to edit that blueprint to accept player input, and sort of the streamlined process that we're going to use to make that happen for this project.